So in today's artist tip video, I'm going to teach you how to terminate your record label contract. All right, so as a real entertainment attorney, you guys contact my law office, and this is a highly requested matter for clients' rights. And, it usually expands beyond just record label contracts. So some of the things I'm going to discuss in this video are applicable to other contracts, but I'm really honing in specifically on record label contracts. And, I know the ins and outs of these contracts. Okay, I am my bread and butter every day is that I'm working with artists. I'm helping to protect artists, but I'm also working with artists who start their own record labels. Right. So I know both sides of how these things work. And more importantly for you guys, how you can kind of think like a pro, think like an attorney, and strategize the best way to get out of the contract if need be. Okay. So number one, we're going to look at the term in the contract. Okay. So you're going to want to actually, open up your contract, and it's usually one of the first sections in your contract, right? So, us attorneys will refer to like a section, a paragraph as a provision, right? Or a clause, but those words essentially mean the same thing, right? So for the context of this video, I might say provision, for example, and I'm really just talking about, look at the section that starts with the word term. All right, so we're looking for, the section on the term, and we're going to look at how long is the contract supposed to go for, right? Because obviously an easy way to look at this is, when can we just naturally get out of the contract? When's it just going to be done? Okay, so look at natural expiration. And for the far majority of you, you're going to see that, well, the initial term might be, one album, no less than 10 songs, which cycle commences upon the commercial release of the album. Okay, and you're like, wow, that is kind of confusing. But when your album comes out, that starts the term. And so just count 12 months from there. So that's your first term, and then you are done, except that a lot of record labels have what are called options. Options are options to extend the contract for additional albums. And, for a lot of record labels, unfortunately for artists, the artist doesn't understand that it's important to negotiate that down to as few as possible. So, I've seen record label contracts where there's like 6 options, which means, the total agreement is for 7 albums. For the average artist, if you're pumping out, 1 album a year, that means that's a 7-year contract. But in any case, so take a look at the term and then see if, there's an option that is guaranteed to the record label, and then has the record label exercised that option. Okay. You want to look for language where it says if the record label after that term expires has not exercised the option, then artist has an obligation to email record label, right? Send some kind of written communication saying, hey, label, you didn't exercise your option. I, the artist, want to terminate. Okay. And then that usually gives the label another opportunity to be like, oh, actually, we changed our mind. We do want to exercise, but it's a step that the artist has to take. Okay, so in order to get the contract terminated and to try doing it this way, you got to send a written notice, and that notice might be via email. Look in the contract. There'll be another section or provision that says notices, and it will say, if you're going to send a notice, you have to send it by US mail and email. Reading the contract is very important, guys. All right, so that's the first piece, and let me really fast on the comments. I'm assuming, actually, over here, Sean on Facebook, I assume that's why Weezer needs dropping albums several a year. Yeah, if an artist can kind of crank them out quickly and get them to the label, and the label distributes them, then you can move through those options a lot faster. But sometimes, there's issues on the, end of the artist or the producer or even the label just being like, we're not ready to release your next album. We want to wait 6 months to kind of go through the marketing cycle. So good point there. All right. So after you've kind of looked at the term, the options, then you're going to go to the section on termination. So there should specifically be a section that says termination. So now let's look at what are our rights to get out of the agreement. All right. So the first piece of this is that the label can terminate usually at any time with written notice. And, the labels have a tendency to kind of keep it open-ended, because if you're like a problem artist and they don't want to work with you, they want to have the ability to kind of send you off on your merry way. But the artist typically does not have kind of this unilateral right to just terminate, which is not good for the artist, right? So we look at the termination provision and we say, is there any right for the artist to terminate? And if not, then what we do is we look at, has there been any material breaches? Has the record label done anything that we can say, record label, you promised to do X, Y, and Z via the contract. You didn't. And so I'm now, hiring the fiery attorney to come after you, to slay, and to get me out of this contract. But as far as making that determination, you're the artist, you're in the agreement, and you should know by actually reading the contract. So one of the big ones that I find labels have a tendency to not do is to comply with accounting provisions, right? So let's say record label promises to provide, quarterly accounting, and they'll be like, all right, artist, has the label provided you in no less than, 4 statements in a year or this year? And oftentimes the artist is like, no, I haven't received a statement ever. So, look at basically all the things that the record label promised to do. And if you find that there are things that the label never did, that may be a material breach, and that may be a basis to terminate the contract. Now, obviously, at this point, and once you actually find some kind of issue, this is a good point to actually talk to an entertainment attorney and make sure that that person can walk you through this, because then, you might want to send a termination notice and be like, hey, for all these reasons, you're in breach of the agreement and adios. But we're not done. So we've now looked at the termination provision, determined if any rights have been kind of violated or contract terms breached. And then we're going to go through, of course, the entirety of the contract in review of all the terms. Have all the terms been honored by the record label? Have there been any material breaches? And even if the record label did fail to send you accounting for like a year, are they doing it now, right? So is there an argument that that material breach has been cured? So as a final kind of ditch effort, so let's say you've gone through the gambit. You've looked at the contract and you've determined that you don't think that there's a material breach. It doesn't look like you're going to be able to get out of the contract. The label still has options to renew. Then what I do is I actually just have kind of a conversation with the label. And I say, okay, label, what's it going to take to get out of this? And sometimes there might be a discussion as far as a buyout, right? So we can look at what does the label want to release that artist from the contract? What kind of carrots can we offer to get the artist out of the contract? But one kind of Hail Mary has worked, and this is possibly the best information you guys will ever hear in your musical careers, is if the record label is a legal entity, right? So, and it probably is in most cases, right? So it's record label, Bombshell Pink LLC, and they say that they are doing business in Texas. Do a search and find Secretary of State for that state and look up the label. See if it's a real label. Because if it's not a real label and they never actually registered to form a company, that could be a basis for you to say this contract is actually void. Okay, so if the contract, or if we have an argument that the contract is void, then you potentially can say, I was never bound to this contract, and see ya. And again, you call me up, we write an angry letter, and we say, adios. So if you guys have any additional questions, make sure you drop some comments down below. But that's my overview on how to terminate your record label contract.